Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, McMorton. My next guest grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where his family, Iranian Immigrants, owned and operated a cowboy bar, a business he was fated to inherit. But when a family friend told him about an opportunity in the advertising business in Los Angeles, he leapt at the chance and never really looked back. His story is one where the trappings of success kind of insulated him from himself, and his journey through sobriety has largely been about getting reacquainted with who he truly is. Won't you please welcome Amir Farhang.
I was born and raised in Tucson. Had a very American type of upbringing. My dad was a hardworking. He owned a bar.
Nice.
My mom stayed at home and took care of us. I had two brothers. Very typical. We lived in a upper middle class country club estate. Mm-hmm. Everything was kind of normal, except that we were, pretty much the American sort of typical American story of how you would grow up, except we weren't American.
Right. Where are your parents from?
We're Iranian.
Right. And when did they move to the States? And
my dad moved in the 60s, early in the 60s, and it was all pre the question I always get, did they come over after the revolution?
Right. Yeah, sure.
They came before. My dad was back, they were looking for the American dream, and my uncle had traveled to the US to go to school, to go to college, and wound up in California initially, and my dad followed him out there, and then he'd gone to community college in California, and then got his undergraduate degree at University of Arizona. My dad went to university, followed him to Tucson, and went to high school, and then subsequently started to go to college, didn't really stick with college, was working. This was a guy who came to the US, with very little in his pocket, and was working in bars and restaurants to get through, and sort of found himself in that life and in that lifestyle, and sort of just stayed in Tucson while my uncle went on to pursue other things. My uncle went on to go get a political science degree, and eventually was the UN ambassador from Iran to the United States during the hostage crisis, during the revolution.
What's his name?
Mansour Farhang.
Wow.
Yeah. So
how huge. That's great.
Yeah. So we had this. So my dad, and the bar my dad owned in Tucson was a cowboy bar. He sort of found his way managing different nightclubs, and country music was really big. Still is really big. It's kind of Tucson. The Tucson I remember growing up in still, was very cowboy, blue collar. There's a university there, but just good salt of the earth, blue collar type of city with a lot of ranches and a lot of cowboys.
Did you guys experience like xenophobia there?
You mean racism? Yes.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, I guess it's racism.
What happened? Like, I didn't think anything was different about me, about our lives, right, about anything until I was about 5 or 6 years old when that happened.
Right.
When they took the hostages,
right.
It started, and then I realized, Amir is not a normal name. I think I was in kindergarten or first grade. I remember going to school that, I remember that happening, and it was like, it was the first, that happened like if I'm not mistaken, I just remember like leaving school, and it might've been like after the first term, and then you go to like the little Christmas holiday break, and then going back to school, and there were like ribbons, and
right.
And every night on TV, we were watching like that's how Nightline was, came about. And, that was the birth of Nightline. We were watching Ted Koppel, my uncle.
It was the yellow ribbon, right?
The yellow ribbon. Yeah.
Yellow ribbon. God, I'd
and the Mickey Mouse. There was the Mickey Mouse t-shirt with the middle finger.
I don't remember that, but
fuck you, Iran. And like,
right.
There were like all these things around. And then I was like, oh, okay, that's us. Like we did that, we did that. And it was always like, you kind of had to blend in, and there's a sense of survival that you go into. I think it's whether it's subconscious or not.
Yeah.
Because you just kind of find yourself apologizing for who you are. And
your dad as a bar owner, I mean, did that fly in the face of his religion? I assume you guys are Muslim, yeah?
There's a Muslim background for sure, but my dad did not raise us that way.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of God, especially after what happened with that revolution and what had been promised to the people and what everyone thought was going to happen. We had the country had been ruled by a theocracy, by the Shah. And it wasn't a theocracy. It was a monarchy.
Right.
And the monarch he was not necessarily the most benevolent king. He was benevolent towards himself, but the people weren't thriving. And this religious zealot was kind of promoting change. And he didn't necessarily sell himself. I'm talking about the Ayatollah. He wasn't selling himself as what he ended up being. He was more of like talking about returning the power and bringing back the spirituality of Iran back to the people. And it was kind of, he was in exile when this was all happening in Paris, and he was organizing this huge revolution and getting all these people, and everyone was excited. They thought what he was going to restore was going to be a free and open society.
Right.
And he had a different plan that not many people were aware of, and it became a theocracy.
Right.
It became which is ironic because we're seeing that happen here.
Sure. And so were you guys raised in like Muslim tradition, or was it a Christian tradition, or just sort of whatever?
No, there was no God. There was no talk of
God.
No, and especially like what I was trying to get to was like, especially after that happened, like, hey, look, if God, that's what God does. And like, we sort of saw what the corruption of religion can bring when put into the hands of men with false and bad intentions. And so my dad just didn't want any talk of it. We didn't talk about it. We kind of mocked religion.
Right.
And
what about Christmas? Did you guys observe Christmas?
We liked presents. and we were trying to blend in. We were trying to assimilate. My parents didn't raise us. They didn't raise us, to be within the tradition of our culture. We didn't speak Farsi really in the house. My parents spoke it to each other, but we spoke English. We played sports. We did all things American. We tried to blend in, and part of the traditions of being here. And I think what I really appreciate about what my parents did was, we live here. We're American. Let's adapt to the American traditions. And as much as you try to adapt to those things and be something, you're still wearing a costume.
Sure.
You're still wearing a costume. So even though we were, we would open our present. My dad would work at the bar, so like he would go to work at night. So we'd open our presents the night before.
Right.
And we had different ways, and we would eat Iranian food with some other things that were part of the American version of what Christmas is. But
I'll tell you, in my drinking days, there was really few days I enjoyed more drinking than Christmas, when, especially in my like teen years, to like finally get away from the fucking family and go to a bar with my friends and get fucked up was really like,
that was the best, especially as when everyone was off at college.
Yeah.
And then like all your buddies that you hadn't seen.
They'd be back in town, and you would all go out Christmas night,
and you'd meet up and see everybody. And like, that was the best.
Meet at the local cowboy bar.
Well, we met at a place. We didn't go to my dad's bar.
Go to your dad's bar.
No, because I didn't want to see what what I was up to. But we'd go to it's a bar called the Bay Horse that we loved. Yeah.
So then, and what sports were you into?
Everything, man. I love basketball, baseball, football.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then when did your sort of like drinking and using start?
Oh man, I saw drinking and using a lot, obviously, because like I would go to the bar when I was a kid.
Right.
And I didn't go to the bar when people were drinking, but I was around the smell of it. The first thing I actually ever really messed with was like in fifth grade. I a guy, a guy. He was a kid, another kid. We huffed rubber cement,
Right.
and we started messing with that a little bit, and that was like, talk about. I don't know if there's brain damage from that or not. There has to be.
Right.
But I remember doing that on the playground. Like we
Right.
had rubber cement and during school, and like somehow my friend knew that if you poured this into a plastic bag and you huffed it,
Wow.
you would trip and you would see shit. And we went out to the playground. We did that. I remember taking some home and doing it, and
Wow.
kind of like knowing this wasn't good.
Right.
And like I didn't develop an addiction to it, but that was
Sure.
the first time I remember that I understood that I could alter my mind with something else.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, and then it didn't really, and then I would, we would like experiment with like sipping beer here and there and stuff like that, but I didn't really start messing with like drinking till I got into high school.
Sure.
Alcohol and marijuana.
Right.
And then later as I got into like my later high school years, I tried cocaine for the first time when I was 17 or 18.
And were you a jock in high school?
Yeah, I was a jock. I mean, I wasn't great at sports. I was
Right.
great at being on the team.
Right.
I think my discipline now with fitness and things like that are way greater. I actually developed, I think my first addiction really was with food when I was young, and sugar and like orange juice and just eating whatever I could when my parents weren't there. So
Right.
I was a chubby kid.
Right.
And
Interesting.
so I didn't thrive.
Right.
I didn't thrive on the field as much as I
Right.
could have, or on the court.
Sure.
I was good. I was good enough to like be on teams and things like that. But I think my success was thwarted by my addiction to that. I think that really was my first gateway thing. It was like just not being able to get enough food, like.
And then what was was food an issue in your house? Were your parents like controlling about food, or were they more just?
Food was an issue in our house for
Right.
sure. For sure. Yeah. There was I mean, it was, what they say with parenting techniques now, as I watch like my friends have kids and my brother have kids, like depriving, being restrictive with certain things creates the desire.
Right.
And there was, there was body, I think issues with our bodies and things like that. And my
Right.
dad was tough with that. He was kind of mentally abusive about, because he would go work out all the time. He would take us, but he would shame you for your weight.
Right.
And things like that.
Sure.
And that would develop. And I had a grandmother who had a bit of was anorexic.
Right.
I remember my mother having issues with food as well, being bulimic and things like that. And
Right.
that was definitely an issue for sure.
Yeah, that's intense. And then so when you discovered booze in high school, like how did that come about? And cocaine. I mean, however it's
I don't even remember
the story.
I can tell you the first time I really actually like
got fucked up.
I would hang around this playground, and I idolized these the basketball players that were like in our city, the good
Sure.
ones. And I would hang around this playground when I was really way too young to be hanging around with these guys. And I went to a party one night and I ran into them, and they were all like, I think I was 14, and these guys were all seniors,
Right.
a different school, and they liked me for,
Right.
And I ended up in a car with those guys, and we started smoking weed. They started handing a pipe around that had weeds with cocaine sprinkled on top of it.
Wow.
And that was the first time
Nice.
that's the first time I ever smoked weed, was that it was actually snow capped.
Right.
And I don't actually know if I even got fucked up.
Right.
And then I remember drinking. I would go out, we would drink. I got my hands on a fake ID. eventually when I was like 16, and we would just drink and drive around and like go out to the desert. We'd have parties out in the desert,
Amazing.
keg parties, and we'd get fucked up, and I'd go home, and my dad wouldn't get home till like after 12 or 1 sometimes. So I would beat him home a lot.
Right.
And I'd get home and I would walk right by my mom, go and like take a shower.
Right.
And go say goodbye, good night, and like try to clean up a little bit. But I found hallucinogenics in high school as well. And I mean, there was nothing you couldn't hand me that I wouldn't do.
Wouldn't eat, right?
Yeah. And I was willing to try anything to get out of myself.
Sure.
You know.
And so then you go to college?
I went to college at the University of Arizona. I stayed. I actually struggled really badly with school, and I was smart, and but I don't know if I had a learning disability or what it was. School was very difficult for me, and I barely graduated high school.
Right.
And I ended up going. It was really rocky, man. Like right after high school, after football ended. I didn't develop like I didn't have a regimen for any kind of athletic. I didn't know how to work out without a team, without a sport. So I got I gained a lot of weight. I started going to community college. I was working in bars and restaurants, and that's a pretty quick way to get into furthering your drinking, is to start hanging out with the back of the house.
Sure.
With those guys. And,
yeah.
I would drink with those guys. I would do drugs with those guys. And luckily I was able to finally get it, my academics into a place where I could go to, I got into the University of Arizona, and I went to college, and I kind of got my shit together, to a degree. I started working for my dad at his bar, and figured out my routine, was able to, got an English degree, and got into some trouble here and there, with like, we were dealing weed and doing things like that, but nothing crazy.
Right. Did you get arrested?
I did get arrested, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Not for dealing.
Right.
I got really lucky, actually. I got pulled over. I was driving like a scooter around, and like every dumb kid, I thought I would drive the scooter around and put a Grateful Dead sticker on it.
Sure.
Which was a good reason for cops to
sure, here, I'll pull you over.
Yeah. And I had just dropped a pound of weed off somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And on the way back, I got pulled over, and I was driving on, I hadn't paid a ticket for like a traffic thing. And the scooter didn't have registration. So I got arrested for that.
Right.
I got arrested at a fraternity for a fight.
Right.
And I got thrown in jail for that for a couple hours, and everything was luckily like expunged and quashed, and
nice.
Nothing crazy. But
and so after University of Arizona, what do you do?
So the plan was always like, I was the fuck up. My brothers were like, my older brother was kind of did everything right, got good grades, was did everything by the book, went to law school. My little brother was also academically more successful than me, and had a more promising future. And I was always just I was always at odds. And I also had a huge addiction to not telling the truth. I was always lying to my parents to buy time,
right.
If I didn't have the report card I knew they wanted, I would go make a report card knowing they were going to find out, but that would buy me a few weeks.
Right.
So I was always just at odds, and they were like, what are we going to do with this kid? So what I was supposed to do, the only thing that I think they thought was going to be my path towards any kind of success, was to finish college and go work with my dad, and eventually succeed him and take over the bar, take over the family business.
Right.
And for a while, I thought that was what I was going to do.
Right.
I'd actually gone to France as for a semester abroad.
Nice.
I was addicted to everything, Nick. So I would, if you liked me, if you were a girl and you kissed me, we were getting married.
Right.
Like that's everything to me was like, what is this feeling? Give me this feeling for the rest of my life.
I want this 100%.
I want this 100%. So I meet a girl in Paris that was part of this study abroad thing.
Were you studying in Paris?
I was studying in Paris as part of like an immersion group of
Nice.
the French program at University of Arizona. We went over there.
How cool.
And I started hooking up with this girl, and then we came back to school, and I was 20 years old, and I proposed to her, like bought her a ring from the mall, from Hellsberg Diamonds, and like, I mean, the look on my parents' face. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to run my dad's bar. I'm getting married. I'm graduated from college.
Did she say yes?
Oh, she said yes. She was all in. She was all in.
She was from Tucson also?
No, she was from Oregon, but she was going to U of A.
Oh, okay, right.
Right. So like I graduated, and I was like, all right, here's what we're doing. I started taking some courses, some grad school courses, and in the English department. And I was like, well, I can also get it. I can learn how, I can be a teacher.
Right.
Figure out some other stuff. And you know, one day I woke up and I was like, I had gone on this road trip with my buddies, a lot of my friends, because I kind of took a gap year after high school, and I sort of entered college a year later. A lot of my friends that I met when I went to school were all a year behind me.
Right.
So when all those guys were about to go into their senior year, we all took this road trip, and we went all the way from Arizona all the way to the top of Eastern Washington, back down through California and Oregon and all that. And we were following fish, of course, you know, and did a lot of drugs. And I realized, like, on that trip, like, I can't do this. Like, I can't marry this girl. I can't have this life. It's just not it's not who I am. I had a degree in English literature with an emphasis on poetry. I had a minor in French. I wanted to be a writer. I had all these dreams. I came back to Tucson, and 6 months I was bartending, and I got this opportunity to come out to LA and work at an advertising agency, answering phones and I wanted to break. I was like, oh, maybe I'll write commercials and do stuff like that. So sure. I just was like, all right, I'm out. And I ended my engagement, told my dad I wasn't going to work at the bar, which really was not met with a lot of acceptance and it was caused a huge rift within us for a lot of years. And
how did the opportunity to go to Arizona to go to California come about?
So I'm bartending one day, and this friend of mine, this woman comes in with her mom, like one of my best friends growing up. His sister was working in HR at an agency out here in Los Angeles called Chiat Day. And she's like, she's like, what are you doing?
That's the binoculars, right?
It was the binoculars at the time. It's not anymore. And I actually live next door to the binoculars now.
Nice.
But she was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, she's like, you graduated? I'm like, yeah. She's like, what do you, I'm like, you're just working in this bar. And I quit working at my dad's bar, and I was working at a different bar. And she started telling me about this agency and what they did. And we do the commercials for Apple and the Taco Bell dog and Sony PlayStation. I'm like, that sounds amazing. And she's like, why don't you call me on Monday? This is like a Thursday. Why don't you call me on Monday and I'll tell you more about it. And maybe you can come out and interview. And so I basically, that day, I went home and I got the rest of the week off, the next week off. And I drove to Los Angeles on Monday and showed up at her office. And she's like, she's like, I guess I have to hire you.
Good for you, man. It's amazing.
So she hired me. I answered phones. I kind of got a sense for what the business was. Right. And through a few detours, I started this career, and it was rocky, because I had no help. I had no financial assistance.
Sure.
I had a little bit of help, but like it was, I was living on my cousin's floor and driving to Venice from Pasadena every morning to answer the phone. And then I was living in an apartment by the airport.
Right.
Here, and
in like, what's that neighborhood? Westchester or something?
Westchester. It was actually just Los Angeles proper. It's like this little
right.
But it's you could see the planes like landing on the runway from my window.
I wonder what is that like nicer now? Because I do remember like back then that was like an affordable place to live. Like
I think it's nicer now, right.
But still, you're under.
It wasn't even really that. It wasn't even bad then, actually.
No. I mean, I said that wrong. I mean, it wasn't. It was like a nice place that you could afford to, because it was like by the beach, like that you had like.
Yeah. We were paying like, I think we were splitting like $1,200 a month rent, so $600. Right. I was making $18,000 a year. So my paychecks were $5.93 after taxes. So
Those
I
are
was
numbers
working.
you never forget.
I was in the red every
Month.
every month, because like one paycheck would go to rent, and it wouldn't even be enough to cover the whole rent. And then I'd have $500 for the rest of the month. I had to make a car payment. And I was eating. If I didn't go to work, I wouldn't eat. And luckily, the agency had a lot of food.
That's good.
Yeah, and that lifestyle was, I mean, it was so much fun, and there was plenty of whatever you wanted, because the advertising business, like, you make friends with the creatives that are older. These guys are making money and they're in their 30s, and like they take you under their wing. You go out, hey, come out and drink with us. I'm like, I don't have any money. They're like, don't worry about it, we'll pay for it. And
nice.
So you would just, you just got by. I don't really think my alcoholism and my drug addiction really, it didn't really, like, it wasn't really in full swing then. Like, I liked to use, I liked to smoke. I smoked weed and things like that, but I was functioning and I was a kid.
So it's hard when you only have $500 to spare to support even a drinking habit at that level,
Yeah, I couldn't afford it.
It's funny. I remember, like, I had moved to LA in '93, so that Chiat Day office, I don't know when it opened, but it was like such like the shit. It was like, we had never seen an office like this before, where nobody had offices, and like you picked up your laptop at that like reception window or something, and then you sort of went wherever you wanted to go. And like, I felt like I could have never survived in an atmosphere like that, where I didn't have like my place where I was supposed to go and do my thing. I mean,
it was ahead of its time, because what it really was the way it functioned almost the way we worked in the pandemic.
Yeah, totally. I was just thinking that, like, oh, that's the way I've been working now for the past 2 years.
Yeah, and it had it was the idea of a fully connected office before the world was even connected.
Wow.
You'd actually go there, and they had these phones, and they would charge, and you'd pick them up, and you'd walk around with this phone all day, and you had a beeper. And I was the receptionist, so I was paging them, like, oh, so-and-so's calling you. And I would page for people that worked in the office. And people would work from all over the place. And Jay Shia was really the sort of the visionary of working that way. And I think he saw the future. Right. And these guys, mind you, man, these guys were working with Apple from the beginning. And Lee Clow, who was the chief creative officer of that and founder of that agency, he was really close with Steve. Right. And I think Steve saw the future and was telling him where things were headed. And I think they were trying to accelerate towards that. And so they were trying to operate at a place before the technology had accelerated and caught up to it.
Right.
And it worked. It worked to a degree. Cool.
So, does your career evolve? I mean, are you still doing this? Are you still an ad man? A madman?
Sort of. So I was answering phones, and what they used to do is they had this thing set up where you would answer phones, you'd kind of get a sense for what every department did. Then you would just eventually get off the desk.
Right.
And you would either go into account management or planning or strategy.
Right.
I went into editing. Like I did not want to go into account management. I wanted to be creative, and to be a copywriter or an art director, you had to put a portfolio together. Right. And I learned that very quickly, that just being funny and being cool and everything like that wasn't going to get you that opportunity.
Right.
And then an opportunity came up in editing and post-production. And so I started working in the post-production thing. And then that kind of ran its course. I briefly got a job through a friend working for a startup, in a sports startup that Shaquille O'Neal had started. Mm-hmm. He started his own athletic brand. And so I started writing web copy for him.
Nice.
And I did that for a year. Then that business kind of didn't.
And what year is that kind of?
This is 98, 99.
Right. So early internet.
Yeah, early internet. So part of the .com thing. And that was another idea that was a bit ahead of its time. It was actually a really good idea. It just didn't, the infrastructure wasn't set up for it. But when that kind of imploded, I had my experience where I was basically kicked out of LA, like where I didn't have the money to stay here. I didn't have any prospects. And I was out of options. And I also didn't have the financial backing to just have my rent paid and have everything sort of sorted while I figured it out to
Right.
be. So I packed my car up, and there was a school out in Atlanta that a lot of these, most of the creatives went to put their portfolios together to get jobs in advertising. So I packed my car up and I moved to Atlanta. I took a loan out. Again, this was another moment where my dad's like, okay, great, you did that. You're going to come back and work at the bar, right? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. So I took a loan out. I went to school, put my portfolio together. And
What
I got
was
a
the
job.
school?
It's called the Creative Circus. Is in Atlanta.
Is it
And,
still a
oh, it's still there. Yeah, it's still there. Atlanta has like 3 portfolio schools.
Interesting.
And then there's a couple of schools like major universities that have advertising creative programs, University of Oregon, University of Texas, and the University of Richmond. VCU in Richmond has an advertising program. So you can come out of those schools, or you can go to these specialty schools. I got a job in New York and on, doing the New York advertising thing. I got a job there, worked there for 5 years, then took jobs everywhere, like moved to Miami, moved to Boulder, moved back to Los Angeles. And then eventually one day I decided I wanted to direct commercials. And so I got into that. So I've been doing that for the past 7 or 8 years.
Wow. And so, and then how does your like addiction evolve over that same journey?
Oh man, it did so well. It thrived.
I bet, moving around that much, New York, different people, different places. How are you going to
what it was? Every time I moved, also, like I went to Atlanta and I was doing a lot of drugs towards the end of living in LA. This is when like MDMA, all that stuff was like really hot here.
Oh yeah.
We were doing it every weekend. And I remember I left LA and I'm like, I'm not doing it. It was such a, what I learned what that was like, okay, you're going to start over, this like idea that a place can change you.
Right.
And it kind of does for a while. And
Sure.
I remember going to Atlanta and being so focused on school because I knew I had to do really well.
Yeah.
And I did. And I was working in restaurants. And I remember just like everyone was doing Coke and I took pride that I didn't do it.
Right.
Like, because I just was like, no, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. And it was more on pride and ego that I did that. And then, but I drank a lot. I started drinking a lot. They would just, these guys, you'd be working in the bar and they would just hand you a shot of like whatever you wanted. And I really learned how to really drink there in this bar that I was working at while going to school. And then in New York, at that point? 24, 25. Right. And then I went to, and then in New York, it was like, I remember telling someone, years after when Mad Men came on, someone asking me, my ex-wife now, she was asking me, like, is that what it was like in New York? And I was like, we didn't wear suits. It was the only difference.
I feel like the thing about New York, I haven't been there in a long time. And certainly I stopped drinking 10 years ago. But like the last time I was there, like one of the things I loved about cocaine was you could drink more on Coke. And I feel like New York has this fucking energy that's keeping you going. And so you're like, oh yeah, let's get more, and you just like, I feel like when I'm in New York, I have like 3 times my capacity for alcohol consumption than anywhere else in the world.
It moves at a pace. It starts later. You go out like it, I remember I wouldn't go out till like 11 o'clock at night. On the way to going out, I'd go to Starbucks and get like a triple shot of espresso.
Right.
And then I'd hit the bar and then I'd be up till 5 a.m. and whatever showed up.
Yeah, totally.
And everyone was doing Coke. Everyone was drinking.
And were you doing Coke at that point, or?
Sometimes, like if it was in the room, I wasn't buying it.
Yeah.
But if it showed up, I did it, and there was plenty of guys who always had it.
Yeah.
And I always made sure to kind of go where they were. I was always checking in. Where are you going to be? Cool. I can make it to Williamsburg tonight. Yeah, no problem.
It didn't matter how flush I was. I was too cheap to buy Coke all the time.
Well, I learned that very quickly that you don't have to buy Coke.
No, you really don't.
You really don't. You just need to be in the room because
especially if you're like a casual Coke user, it's like there's always someone who's a more serious Coke user.
And most of the time, and I think some of these guys didn't have problems because I know when I got towards the end of my addiction, and especially with Coke, I was not going out with Coke. I didn't want to share my cocaine with anybody. But a lot of guys, people start doing Coke. They get very generous and loving and sharing with their drugs.
I mean, I stopped doing it pretty early on. I mean, long before I stopped drinking, just because it was so destructive. Like I would, if there was a mountain of Coke, I would not leave the room until it was gone. However long it took.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I relate to that.
and just that thing, like, oh, we're out of Coke. Okay, so now we're gonna spend like the next 4 hours getting more Coke. It was like before. So, and so like so how long have you been sober now?
I will sober. It'll be 7 years, November 14th. So.
And how old are you?
I'm 47 years old.
47. So you got sober at 40. I got sober at 42.
Yeah.
So what happens between sort of New York early advertising career and getting sober? It's a big question. It's just a little stressful, but I'm just curious about those 17 years.
Yeah, right. Well, I started having success. Like I really started doing well, and so much of it was built on this chip on my shoulder. I was going to prove to my everyone who said I wasn't going to amount to anything. My dad, my teachers, all these people. And I started winning. I started doing things in the business that got me recognition.
And at this point, you're on the creative side.
I'm on the creative side, right? I'm writing commercials. I wrote an idea for a campaign that actually ultimately became a television show that had 2 seasons.
What was that?
That was a show it was on MTV called Game Killers. It was it was for Axe deodorant.
Right. Sure.
Body spray. And it was considered this, a breakthrough idea in terms of bridging the gap between advertising and entertainment.
Yeah.
And boy, man, did it go to my head. Like all of a sudden it was like, this is one of the best ideas in the history of advertising and all this. And it's also short-lived also, the way things moved. But, you couldn't tell me anything after that. I had arrived and I was a rock star. And the thing about advertising is it's such a small world, but it treats itself with such importance, the community of it. Like you can be famous in this small world, right? Yeah. Step outside of it, no one knows who the hell you are. But that fame and that level of like attention and that sort of like reverence people can have for you, and you could be labeled things like, oh, that guy's a creative genius. And it's like, well, if you were a creative genius, you probably would be writing books, movies, music, or creating art. I don't know that you're making ads for Volkswagen, but I went with it. I rolled with it, and I was full of ego. I worked really hard. I got a really insane work ethic from my dad that I was so competitive. I think some of the things I took from sports, and that athlete's mentality, I brought it into my profession, and I didn't make a lot of friends, and I had some friends for sure, but I was brash, and I wasn't always easy to get along with, and combative, and I could be a bully and be very, just not necessarily like, it was always like a swing, right? It was always like I could be really kind and loving and like the funnest guy to be around, and I could turn on you so fast. And I think the drugs and the alcohol, you look back on it, you're like, oh, those were just the swings that, you're not so much fun when you to show up to work on after a night of doing coke, because you've depleted all the serotonin out of your brain. And you're irritable, the restless, irritable, and discontent. All that happened, and you follow the jobs in that industry, right? And like the best agency in the world, I was working at one of the best ones, and then the other one that was doing so much great stuff was in Miami. And so I was like, I left New York to go to Miami, and I was like, I'm not going to do coke anymore. So I'm going to move to Miami and not do coke anymore. I found coke the night I moved to Miami. Then that agency decided they were moving their headquarters to Boulder, Colorado, and that was not a place for me to be. And with like, it would be amazing to live in now as a sober person. I would love. And I think it all kind of just to get through the story, like.
I'm curious why was Boulder a bad place? Just because it's like a college town and lots of partying and like.
It wasn't even a lot of partying. It just like I was not. my lifestyle was so suited for living in New York and
Right,
getting
you're an
up,
urban guy.
going out late,
Yeah.
going out and like partying, being in dive bars,
Sure.
being with like-minded people. And you go to
Yeah.
Boulder, if you're not figuring out how to cross-country ski, ride bikes, do things like that, it's active. Like some of the most insane athletes in the world live there.
Sure.
The Kenyan Olympic running team, these guys that run marathons would train there in their off season. You'd see these elite, the U.S. Olympic ski team, the Olympic runners, boulder, rock climbers, all these guys. And so you're not waking up early and living that active lifestyle. You're trying to go out late and party. By the way, I'm 32, 33 years old at the time, maybe a little bit younger. College kids don't really want to mess with you. You're too old to hang out with college kids. And so you would do a lot of drinking at home, and it was also predominantly white.
Right.
And, I didn't necessarily fit in there as far as that went. And, I had some great friends that I met at that agency that I'm still friends with today. But the lifestyle of also working at that agency was really, really intense.
Right.
It was really, really intense. And I did not get along with the guy who owned it. I only lasted a year there. I quit a year to the day, and I moved out to Los Angeles and got a job. I got actually my dream job. I was working for Adidas. Mm-hmm. I was doing Adidas basketball. I was doing like the stuff I loved. Cool. And I was working with, NBA players. I was working with some amazing directors that mentored me, that got me to where I am now.
Right.
And then I think right around my mid 30s was when I found this friend group that I had known since college, that had kind of settled out here. And these guys loved drugs and they loved partying, and they hung out with hot girls, and they were living the LA lifestyle. Had friends with money in the mansion up in the hills, everything. And I was living that life, and I was going hard, like really hard. And, I always say this when I speak in AA, my, Friday became Thursday, and Monday became the new Sunday.
Right.
So all of a sudden I wasn't going to work. I was like missing things, and I would pump the brakes on stuff and like be able to like pull back. And then all of a sudden I would, I was buying Coke for myself and doing Coke by myself. And the short of it is, I feel like when I was about 35 years old, I went out on a bender and I blacked out, and I woke up and I was 40 years old and I was married to someone I barely knew, and didn't know what had happened. I just didn't know who I was. I hated my life.
Is that like, we're not speaking literally.
Like, I literally
like there's Sid Caesar's book, like he goes to Australia and he like literally is 8 months he doesn't remember.
No, I didn't have that. Like I remember it. Don't get me wrong, but but when I think back on those like 5 years,
lost your way,
where my drug and alcohol and like the way I lived my life, the way I chose my friends, the way the way I operated, how much I cared about what everybody thought, it was such a blur, and it was such a like rinse and repeat.
Get
drunk, do a bunch of coke all weekend, spend Monday through Wednesday trying to get back to rehabilitate, taking steams, working out, eating right, then going back and just redoing it all over again. And I was really lucky. I think I call it like I think of God is my higher power. I just refer to God as an all-encompassing thing. I met this girl who did not live that way, and I think. And I always wanted to stop. Always had these milestones, like, all right, you're going to stop. You're not going to do this after this weekend's the last weekend. And oh, you met this girl, she doesn't party. Now you're going to stop. Couldn't stop. Okay. You got engaged. Now you don't do that anymore. Couldn't stop. You're getting married. You're not going to do coke anymore. Nope. Doing coke on my wedding night. Right. Oh, you're turning 40. That's it. Your bachelor party. That's your last hurrah. Was not my last hurrah. I could not set these intentions could not be met because I was addicted. And as much as this was the worst thing ever, because when you're living with someone who doesn't really drink, and she had this whole spiritual path she was on, and I was really attracted to that. I really wanted to live that way. When you don't really see how bad your drinking problem is until you live with somebody else.
Right.
It seems normal. It seems normal, like to just keep going to the fridge and pouring a glass. But when someone's watching you do that, you're like, oh my God, this is not great. This is not great. And she started to really, the marriage itself was predicated on a lie that I was keeping from her. I was hiding this coke problem.
Right.
She knew something was up. She said I needed to get, you obviously, when you drink, something happens to you. She didn't know I was doing coke.
Right.
But when you go and do coke, you go meet your buddy at like 5 o'clock for a drink and you do a couple lines and then you go home to have dinner. You're not eating, all of a sudden you're faking like, oh, I got a stomach issue or something's not right. And you're obviously not intimately connecting. You're just on two different frequencies. And the first 3 years of our marriage were like that. And my bottom, if we want to get to my bottom was, she was out of town. I was like, okay, she's out of town for 4 days. I can plan this bender. I could plan Friday, Saturday, I'm going to go out. Thursday and Friday, I'm going to go out. Saturday, I'm going to get right. Sunday, I'm going to pick her up from the airport.
Right.
Thursday night, I went out. And next thing I know, Sunday comes, she's calling me from the airport, asking me where I am. And I'm waking up on the floor.
Right.
And I'm surrounded by bottles and drugs. And I'm like, I can't come get you. She's like, I know. I'd called her in the middle of the night, apparently. Don't remember doing that. I had gone on my bike. I'd ridden my bike. I realized I'd ridden my bike that night because my bike was in the living room. And that scared me because I didn't really, I kind of had a blur of remembering riding my bike around Venice in the middle of the night, maybe to go score more drugs, who knows. That was when she, she came home and I was like, I'm done. I'm going to go to AA. And it took me a while to actually, I went to a meeting and I'm like, I don't need this. Cause I went to you're from LA, like I went to one of those meetings, the VRC in Venice, which was like,
it's all like homeless people.
Yes. And so I walked in there and
how'd you find that meeting?
It was the closest one to my house. You
didn't have anyone who was sober that you could be like, I need help?
Not really.
Right.
There was one guy I knew that was sober. And the funny thing about people that when you get in the program and like you learn about some of your friends who get sober and talk about AA, then you get sober and then you realize, oh, they don't go to meetings and they don't work a program and like they're just dry.
Right.
So my friend was like, yeah, I don't really go to meetings, but and I just looked it up online and there was a meeting at this place. It was a mile from my house. So I walked in there. And this kind of goes back to like.
And how soon is this after your wife got home from?
I went to that meeting, like, I think that meeting I went to was like a day later.
Right.
And it was gnarly, man. It was like a pirate ship. And there were guys, like there was a fight. Like there was a guy, this homeless guys came in to get the donuts and another guy was pissed about it. They're about to fight. And it was like guys didn't have teeth. And it was just like, fucked up, man. And I'm like, I'm not an alcoholic. And this goes back to like what my dad had always said about, we had guys at our bar. You'd go open the bar up at noon for deliveries and people would show up and they'd drink all day. And they would leave when people showed up. And my dad always said, like, the alcoholics are the people who are outside with the paper bags. And so I had a really skewed idea of what an alcoholic was. I didn't realize you could be high function. By the way, mind you, when I'm doing all this, I'm earning as much money as I ever have. I'm driving a nice car. I have all this stuff. I have a beautiful wife, wearing nice clothes. I'm doing all this stuff. Everything looks fine on the outside.
Yeah.
But I'm miserable.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely miserable. I'm having suicidal ideation, all this stuff. I'm like, I didn't know that an alcoholic could be that. I thought alcoholics had to be living on the street.
Right.
And that was it. There was no distinction between the two. So I came home and said, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm going to just stop this on my own.
Right.
And I didn't drink for 5 weeks, but I was taking like, doing like a little self marijuana maintenance. And I was getting these little like Jolly Rancher things that had 5-10 milligrams of THC. And I was putting some, and it just, I was trying to hang out with my friends. I couldn't do it because they were still partying. They were not supportive of me trying to stop drinking. And then I had one more night, like where I went out and I used, and also, I don't know if, I think plenty of people can relate to this. Cocaine stopped working for me. I would drink and I would do a line to start drinking, to keep drinking. And then this phenomenon would happen with my face where it would kind of seize up, like I had a stroke and my tongue would swell and I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk. And I would it was so obvious that I was doing something. And, the last time using, I just did a little bit and I had a little bit of relief for about 30 seconds. And then I went back to just being this comatose human. I'm like, this is no way to live. So then I started really pounding the pavement trying to find meetings and I just started going, and I found, this group on the West Side AA men's meetings.
I know that meeting, sure.
Yeah. And I found my sponsor, and it was, I want to say that it was like the light went on. It was hard. It was like it's still the hardest thing I've ever done. I did not like AA. I did not like it. There are days where I still don't like it. It's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But sometimes I'm like, why did it come to this? Why am I in the basement of a church on a Friday night, talking about all this stuff? And I think where it actually started to really hit for me is when I really started doing the steps, because like just going to meetings for 6 months and that initial newness of everything wore off. And
Sure.
Then I got into the steps, and then, my wife and I made this decision to try to save our marriage. I give her so much credit because she was really supportive of, she drove me to meetings. She did everything. And, we were trying to save our relationship, and we decided, let's not make any decisions about our marriage until you're sober. And we thought we could, one last thing to fix our problem was, okay, maybe being in LA, there's too much baggage here. We bought a house in Austin. She's from Texas. So we moved to Austin with 6 months sober. I moved to Austin. I got a year in Austin, and then we both decided, we were both grateful that I had gotten sober and that we'd both figured out who we were. Once I figured out who I was by doing a fourth and fifth step, I had to look around and go, well, who was this person? I never even considered who this person was, if this person was right for me. I married her under all these other.
Yeah.
I think there was a higher power at play, that I found someone who wasn't going to enable me. I can't believe that happened. I found someone who did not play by the rules I did, who was able to hold a mirror up to what I was doing and made me look at that mirror and go, this is not right. And I'm so grateful for that. And we divorced amicably. I moved back to LA, and the program didn't really change for me. My sobriety, the idea of having fun in sobriety didn't really sort of change till after about 3 or 4 years of sobriety. I really start to find my footing and really be comfortable with who I was and who I could be, and how just content I could be. And all these tools we learn about, I stopped caring about what other people think. And I stopped not trying to take everything so personally. And my life just took off professionally. The relationships I had, the friendships I have less, I don't have as many friends as I did before, but I have more friends of substance.
Right.
I had friends before, as I think the friends I had before possessed substances. The friends I have now have possessed substance internally and have values, and it's a crazy place. You meet some characters.
Totally.
But I think the pandemic was if AA doesn't prepare you for a pandemic, getting sober to me was a pandemic, because
totally. Just the whole idea of be thankful for today and what we have, and obviously we can't predict the future, and one day at a time. All these things were wildly helpful in the
or what about okay, so when I got sober, I had a friend group that God bless them, they just were not supportive. So I lost the ability to go out. I would try to go out. They'd be on drugs. I couldn't go out anymore. I didn't have any friends. I didn't really make any friends in AA to begin with. So I was by myself all the time. I was with my program, calling my sponsor. So it was a quarantine in a lot of ways. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm kind of built for this. And, I started getting really into meditation, developed a really, really kind of, I would say, an alcoholic yoga practice. I remember going into hot yoga, with a few months sober, and it was 105-degree room. And I was doing some pose where I was bent over and I stood up, and the rush of whatever went to my head was I do yoga now every day.
You're I'm fucked up. Yeah.
I'm fucked up. I'm doing this every day.
I get fucked up on meditating. I just love how it feels. I'm
I love how it feels. And if I'm going to be addicted to something, I'll be addicted to yoga. I'm going next week up to Big Sur to do a yoga retreat, a meditation retreat. I'm less intense about it as I was. I'm starting to even out.
Right.
I'm starting to even out on the different things I do and finding the balance, and it's been a journey, almost 7 years of being sober, catching myself in these moments where is this addictive behavior? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, sure. There is always that. Like, I mean, I'm definitely addicted to tennis at the moment. I just fucking love playing tennis. I'm like a middle-aged white cliche, like,
Yeah.
but better that there's a lot of worse things to be addicted to. I'm curious, when did you transition to directing? Like, how did that happen pre-sobriety or during?
No, that happened pre-sobriety.
Right.
And that also was a big, if you think being a creative director is like, gives you sort of a false sense of an inflated sense of self, try being a director, because
right.
I quit on, I became a director. I had a couple mentors, directing mentors, that had kind of encouraged me to try it. And they'd given me some opportunities to, when I was working with them, to do some B unit work. And
right.
I'd gotten passed over for a promotion that I wanted. And when I found out that was happening, I just went into my boss's office and quit. And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to be a director." I had no plan.
Right.
And that's sort of what happened. I got an opportunity. My brother, who became a creative director, had a little small project that I directed. And that did well.
Right.
And that kind of got the ball rolling.
Nice.
But then you become a director, and then all of a sudden, like, you become part of the DGA, and the DGA rules are you fly first class. And so you're traveling to New York, and you're flying first class, you're being put up in nice hotels. And that was definitely.
Also, when you're a director, everyone cares what your opinion is. Everyone.
Well, that's the funny thing, right? About there's a part of the big book.
What should we do about this? And you're like,
The biggest thing about that is, like, the big book actually has a part that says the alcoholic is very much like the director who tries to run the show. And I'm like, right. Well, when I'm the director, I do run the show. And right. Like you said, my opinion does matter. And I do get to arrange the actors, and I do get to decide how the story unfolds. I do get to control everything. The difference I learned was, when I'm the director on a project, the little micro world that is created out of that endeavor is aware of this agreement, and they've signed up for it, and they're willing participants in your position as the creator of this universe. When you leave that world and that project is over, the rest of the world does not know that you're the director. And so you have to find that distinction. Well,
I do find, like, my director friends, I'll be like at a dinner, and I'm like, "Hey, buddy, you're not directing this fucking episode, okay?"
Yeah. Let me order everything for the table, and I don't do that. I don't do that. But I did have one job in advertising where it was pretty high level, and this is called drunkalogs. I mean, there was one drunkalog that I remember being in traveling. I was working for an agency in Amsterdam, and I had like a 6-month contract to work with them. And I couldn't stay. I was going to die if I lived in Amsterdam.
Right.
Everything was too accessible. I remember flying to Atlanta for a meeting with Coca-Cola and being on a bender the whole night. I'd gone back to the bar I worked at it when I was in school.
Right.
One of the bartenders was still there, and he handed me a bag.
Oh, that's amazing.
I went back to the Four Seasons, and I did like almost the rest of the bag. And I had a meeting at 9 a.m. and I got up at 7. The craziest part about this story, I'll get to in a second, but I had to do a huge line of Coke just to get ready to go, just to get up for this meeting. Shower, went to Coca-Cola on Coke, and I'm sitting in the lobby, and they had all these, like, all the Coke products you would ever made are all in these fountain drinks. And Coke had a product called Coke Black, which was Coke with coffee.
Right.
And I had poured a hot cup of coffee, and I'm just tweaking, and like, right. And I see the Coke Black, and I'm just like, "Ooh, this is hot black coffee. I'm going to put the Coke Black in this." So I mixed Coke Black with coffee while I'm high on Coke. Go and have this amazing meeting, by the way. Like, go up there and just like present all this work.
Right.
I'm like, "Yeah, this is what blah, blah, blah." And everyone's like, "This is great, whatever." I go back, and like, I'm sitting in the hotel, and I'm like, I have the rest of the afternoon, and I'm like, decide to watch a movie. And I turn on, I'm going to watch Flight, that movie with Denzel Washington.
Right.
The opening scene, he does the same thing. It's in Atlanta. He's in a hotel. He wakes up. I didn't have a hot stripper with me or anything like that. Right. He gets up, and he has to go fly a plane. He does a huge line of Coke and goes to work. And I was like, holy shit.
Wow.
Like, did someone decide to make this movie like an elevated story of my life? Like, and it was so fucked up. it was so fucked up to see that.
That's amazing.
It also wasn't enough to get me sober, by the way.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But I think about the bottoms, like how many bottoms we have that should have been my bottom, like that. It's like, I think the bottom I had wasn't nearly as low as I'd been.
Sure. Is your dad still alive?
Mom and dad are still alive. Yeah, still living.
And does he still have the bar?
The bar, he doesn't own the bar anymore. The bar's still there though.
Nice.
He sold it. He's retired now.
And how about your older brother? I assume your younger brother is the one who became the creative director.
Yeah, my younger brother has his own agency. He lives in Atlanta. He has an agency he started last year that's doing really well, called Majority. My older brother's owns his own law firm in Tucson. Is also really active in the community there. He's the chairman of a bowl game, does a lot for the community, and for he has both my brothers have podcasts.
Oh, no way, really?
Yeah, my brother has an industry advertising related podcast, and my older brother has a sports show that he does. So. And
do you work for your brother, who's the ad agency? Do you ever do jobs for them?
I do some work for him. Actually, when he was going and trying to launch this thing and to get investors, I mentioned working for Shaq years ago, and I've kind of this relationship with Shaquille for 20 years. I do a lot of his commercials.
Sure.
I was able to actually, when he was looking for some funding and a business venture, a business partner to sort of help fund this venture, I actually put him in touch with Shaq, and Shaq became a partner, one of the founding partners of this agency, sort of silent, but so I was able to help get that going with him and do some project. I've done some, I've done a little bit of work with him, helping on the creative side, and there's a project we're about to go into direct. I'm going to direct probably here in about a month or two. But yeah, it's been fun. It's really fun, but this is like sort of my relationships with them were really, my older brother and I we were close, but not really. It was fractured. My little brother and I had my alcoholism and my drug use really we were very tight, and but that had fractured our relationship as well. I couldn't imagine, like, one of the gifts of being sober is like being able to have this relationship with my brother that is not only like I'm close with both of them, but able to like work with them, and like being able to work with families, not always easy, but we're able to.
Yeah, totally. I mean, talk about needing to use the 12 steps with your family. It's like, I'm going to keep my side of the street clean. Like, their problems are not my problems. Like, codependency, codependency that comes in for sure. Well, Amir, I know you have a 9:45 hard out, so we are going to get you out 7 minutes before that.
Awesome, man. Well, this was great. If there's anything I could impart to anybody is stopping is just the beginning, and learning who you are is maybe the greatest gift. And I think the 12 steps in the big book is as much of the spiritual texts I've read from all these different religions and self-help books and things like that. The big book, I think, is divinely inspired. It doesn't mean you need to believe in God or any specific God. And the fact that you get to define what that is really amazing. And I don't think sobriety and emotional sobriety and inner peace is really achieved without doing the work on yourself. And it's hard. It's not easy. This miracle doesn't just happen like overnight, and it's going to be painful at times, but the benefits and the miracle of it are worth all that work.
That's awesome. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.